Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn. This month, I'm back, and so is Francesca, who covered for us last month in a conversation with Terry Bean in relation to the drive to bond and our water element. So this month, Terry is out doing the world justice by delivering some talent development opportunities. And I am excited to be back. And this is my first interaction with Francesca here on our monthly Lunch and Learn. So, welcome, Francesca. Excited to be here with you today.
Honored to be here. Thank you so much, Jay.
All right, so let's dig in on this. The earth element. Neither one of us have this as our primary element. And if I recall correctly, it may be the lower element for each of us. How does the earth element show up for you, Francesca?
Absolutely, Jay. And you know what? What I'll do too, and I did this last time on our Lunch and Learn. For any of you on this call that are completely new to behavior elements, and you're asking yourself, "What's the earth element? What does this mean?" I'll just highlight this briefly, and then I'll dive right into the question that Jay just asked me. So essentially, the drive to protect, that's our earth element. So this is something that shows up very low on the charts for someone like Jay and myself. But essentially, what this is, we want to think about, the hormones that run through our body. So if there's a perceivable threat that's coming into the room, sometimes Jay will talk about the saber-toothed tiger running into the room. And what ends up happening is actually a part of our brain, the hypothalamus, it'll actually start to trigger to the adrenal glands in our brain and our body to kind of start producing certain hormones. So you're all familiar with cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. Those come rushing through our bodies because we are in a state of our sympathetic nervous system. So we're in that state of fight or flight. So we go into that energy of protection. So what the earth element is so incredibly good for, of course, all of our elements have the pros and the cons, but our earth element is incredibly good for that structured side of things, the processes, all of that, and that protection. What that also ends up showing up as for Jay and I, and I'll go dive right into this now that I've tapped into a little bit of that. For me, someone will meet me and say, Francesca, you're very organized, you're very diligent, and everything has a place and a system. And that can be true at certain times, but the fact is, just because we're low in an element doesn't mean that we're bad at it. So for me, how that shows up, yes, I can choose to be very organized, I can choose to have systems and processes, but it just means I'm going to have to put a little bit more intentionality into it versus my high drives, say fire and water, that just come a little bit more naturally to me. So I would say, Jay, to answer your question, how the element shows up for me, there are aspects and times where that earth element will be so prevalent and I will put that energy and intention into it and you will see it really come to the forefront. Maybe we'll joke a bit about this later about closet spaces and how those I can have a pantry full of organized spices and have everything meticulously laid out. And then there's other closets in the house that are a complete disaster. That's a very good example of my earth element takes that intentionality. But I'll throw the baton to you, Jay, and then we can kind of pass it back and forth.
Yeah, and thank you for diving into that up front. It's really interesting because when we hear those different stress chemicals, whether it's cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, et cetera, that's kind of associated with the limbic, the fear, we tend to always think that those are negative. And they're not. They're actually action-oriented chemicals. So they've helped us to stay alive all of these, years, 185,000 years on this planet as Homo sapiens. That is one of our most essential systems. It's the prolonged nature when we have it for an extended period of time that is actually debilitating stress versus enhancing stress, which motivates us to take action, to plan, to do something. So, from that earth element, in many cases, what it's trying to do is manage uncertainty, reduce the likelihood that we're going to be, caught unawares, manage risk, and that's really where that systematic processing come from. If I can create a system and it's reliable, guess what? I know what's going to happen. I know I'm going to be able to manage it. I have a plan. I have the data. I've got the information, and we can move forward. And that's how it reflects in behaviors. Now, to answer the question, I used to, and I'm going to call it used to, be 100% resistant to anything that looked like a structure, a process, or a system. I always viewed them as very limiting. It'd be like when I was working at Wayne State University, for example, the policies and bylaws and everything else that come along with it. I mean, this manual for like employees was a binder that was about this thick. And now the interesting thing is, I read it cover to cover. That's probably somewhat surprising. Most people would be like, well, if you were antithesis of Earth, why would you actually read that cover to cover? Well, I'm a debater and I like to win. And in order to win, sometimes you have to know the rules. So my fire element pushed me forward to essentially read every single aspect of that. And I was able to go back and utilize those rules, bylaws, and whatever in a very functional way for me to get my way. But every time that I would come across a rule, I would question it. Be like, why did they do this? What was the mentality behind this? I'd almost question it like my original iteration of HR manuals. So any of you HR people out there, you can yell at me in the chat, was behave intelligently. That was it. That was my entire HR manual. Like if you didn't do that, then well, you know what? That was grounds for dismissal. If you did do that, then awesome. I can work with just about anything that comes within that frame. I recognize now the value of Earth, the importance of Earth, and what we can really accomplish with it. So I would say that I have had a large transition and a large behavioral shift over the course of time. But I'm really glad that you brought up just because you're low doesn't mean you're bad at it. And just because you're high doesn't mean you're good at it. Obviously, mine being very, very high fire, not always the best sets of behavior. So, as you frame that, Francesca, how did you develop an idea towards being more process or systems focused or thinking about those things in a more structured manner?
Absolutely. And Jay, I just want to mention this. There's a couple people in our audience that have personal messaged me. Your camera seems to be freezing really badly, so I just want to make sure that while I'm sharing this next part, that you have an opportunity to adjust. I know sometimes the lovely joy of doing these things virtually is that we do have some little hiccups that we'll always be able to mitigate when it comes to our internet connection. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that because I know it's hard to know from our own end. But yeah, thank you, Jay. I'll absolutely dive into that. And you know what's so interesting? I think when I was starting to consider the aspect between earth and fire, so fire, for those of you that are new to behavioral elements in the audience, fire is our drive to acquire. And for myself and for Jay, that is our highest element, definitely shows up in our business, but also personal lives. So fire is very bold, it's fast moving, ambitious, focused on outcomes and focused on the innovation aspect of things. Earth tends to move a little bit more on the slower end, more cautiously, prioritizing stability. As of course, we're on the unstructured side versus the earth and the water are more on that structured side. So Earth tends to move a little bit more slowly, cautiously, a little bit more prioritizing that stability, process, and sustainability. Us as fires don't necessarily think about those things. We're like, we have an idea, let's run with it. So I think what I really find interesting and what's really really neat about how we always talk about with behavioral elements, it's so different than that of a personality assessment because up to the age of 6 years old, that's when our personality is very much concreted in that coloring book of what we kind of draw in the lines of for the rest of our lives. But as Jay always says, myself, Terry, all of us always say on these calls, are the behavioral aspect of things is all to do with change. So we're talking about neuroplasticity. This is the opportunity for us to grow, to evolve, and to move forward in a way that we get to choose how we want to behave. Jay says it often. This is not just who I am, it's who I'm choosing to be. So what I find really interesting is that had I taken this assessment maybe 10, 15 years ago, my earth may have been a little bit higher on the scale. And I think that really does depend on our external circumstances. So when I was working on a large scale development, and we talked a bit about this when I was on the call with Terry, but it was more so relating to water. But when it came to earth, when I was on that large scale development, you're working with large scale developers, the top builders in our city, and we were working with 103 lot subdivision. And in the midst of this, we talked about the water aspect, but as it relates to Earth, how that element ended up showing up for me on that 5 year project was actually the fact that we had a disclosure statement, kind of like Jay was talking about with debate, where he would run through all these books and read it from cover to cover. I was going through disclosure statements that were this thick, and and just all of these different aspect engineering reports, I had to become very earth focused because if I didn't know that manual and that disclosure statement inside and out, when the builders, when the clients or different developers or investors would come to our site and expect me to be an expert on this, the only way for me to do so was for me to make sure that that intentionality was there and everything was memorized to a T. I mean, we can obviously see right through this. Still, my main drive would be coming through, my drive to acquire. The whole reason why I wanted to read that manual back to front was because it was a drive to win and it was a drive for me to succeed and excel at that project. But I think and I'm sure Jay, you can relate to this, but I know that what can get on Earth's nerves when it comes to us as fires, we can be very impulsive. So impulsiveness is definitely an aspect, cutting corners. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but I think that Jay has related to this in previous calls where he'll be like, guys, we're going to China. And the team's like, okay. And they'll do research on China for the next 6 weeks to make sure that he has his project set up. And the next day, he'll read a book, he'll look at the time and go, you know what? I think we need to go to South America. That's the next thing. And the team's looking at us like, what's all this work that I just wasted my time on? So that can kind of be that cutting corners aspect. Dismissing structure can be an aspect, and I think also just long-term implications in favor of short-term wins. I know that us as fires have to be incredibly diligent to make sure that we are being mindful of if we are making a choice, how does this benefit us, not just for a short-term win, but what's that long-term sustainability come into the picture. Earths may see our fire as a bit recklessness, or a little bit as inconsiderate. So that's definitely something that for me, as a team leader, especially when I was on a large scale development project, we had a lot of Earths with our engineers and our technical assistants and our investors and developers. So it was definitely an intentionality for to show up in that way that was very considerate of their structure and making sure that was respected. So our vision didn't get in the way of that. How about you, Jay? How does that tend to relate for you on your end?
Yeah, so
Now that you've long debate.
I think that I've fixed the internet issue, so thank you for that. I want to comment, and if you have questions, people that are here, if you have questions, if you're curious about something, toss it into the chat. I want to comment on Sarah's chat here. As an earth water, it's great to work with the fire. I can be open and honest with. Fire helps me not get stuck in the mud and help make sure that we do not miss key things related. You help make sure things aren't missed because of compliance or anything else like that. And that's really, it speaks to exactly what I'm going to bring up on that is balance. That's really where I started to realize I am missing something. Oh no, I'm still frozen. Not sure what's going on here.
That's
I might
okay.
jump out and jump back in.
You're
Let's
more
see.
than welcome to do that. Absolutely.
Okay. Uh, let's see if I'll
I have a
share.
question that just got DM'd to me personally. So if you want, Jay, I'll answer that question, and then dive out, and dive back in, and hopefully Jay's computer will readjust. Does that work for you, Jay?
That's incredible. Thank you. I'll be
Okay.
right back with you. All right. So let's see if this is going to stick. Otherwise, I might even just drop the camera if necessary. But um, yeah, to Sarah's point, that was actually really what brought me back to the space of recognizing, hey, Earth is a huge value. Is when I started to see the value of balancing. And, I'd worked with Earths in the past that I felt were Earths for Earth's sake, where it was just like, but this is the rules. There is no flexibility. There is no movement. There is no this. And I was a fire for fire's sake. It's like, oh yeah, let me show you. I'm going to do it regardless or anything else. And that became a big tension point for conflict. However, when I've worked with other Earths or other people in the future, one of the things that I've realized is, okay, maybe that Earth is there to tell me something. Because what I started to see was while I was successful in some aspects, the repeatability of that, or how much time I was doing by recreating the wheel over and over and over and over again, was wasteful. And I would actually win more if I did create some systems and structures and processes. So I started to really value that perspective differently because I saw it as something that amplified success and amplified results. And while it could be limiting in some cases, sometimes that limitation is absolutely necessary. So I don't have the team going to China and then to South America and then somewhere else and spreading out all of the resources in a non-functional way. So to Sarah's point, that's really where the harmony comes from, is being able to recognize, hey, this isn't necessarily my skill set, or this isn't what I lean into first. Now, I do want to comment because it was something you said right before I jumped off. Just because we're low, we're not bad at something. Just because we're high doesn't mean that we're good at something. And when we think about this, I'm actually quite good at earth tasks. If any of you are Robert's Rules of Order people, I'm very, very good at policy, procedure, parliamentary procedure, etc., navigating meetings in a structured, efficient manner. I'm good at research science. I am really, really good at search engine optimization, all very detailed, organized, focused skills. They just drain the life out of me. So there was points and times when I felt that in having to engage in those types of skills, it was more or less exhausting. Um, how has that shown up for you, Francesca? Do you find that when you are leaning into your earth element, do you find that when you're leaning into your earth element, is it more of, say, exhausting? Do you find value in it? Is it something that you lean into your fire in order to bring it about? What does that look like for you?
Absolutely. I thank you for bringing that up, Jay. I think the perfect example of this would be in the real estate world. For a chunk of time, I didn't have an executive assistant. For a while, I was someone's executive assistant. So I did a lot of those tasks. But of course, I think my drive behind doing those tasks was I got to see Nicholas and our team win. So that was kind of the driving factor. When I ended up getting licensed as a realtor, and I worked in large scale development, I didn't have a system for a while. So I was the one doing the spreadsheets, doing all of the different meticulous tasks. So when a developer would ask, I want a very detailed report, here's what I want it to look like. This would take me hours and hours on end. I would be very good at it. Sure, I would enjoy it to some degree, but it took such a long time. And then I got an executive assistant. And Lynette would say, I've got that. She is high earth through and through. And this would take her 5 minutes. She loved it. She's energized. She's like, give me more. I'm like, you enjoyed that? And it took you 5 minutes. I got to realize very, very quickly, and especially as a fire and as a high water, sometimes one of the things that we can get stuck on as fires is that we end up being the bottleneck. If we are taking over all the tasks, we rob the ability for somebody else that's so incredibly good and succinct in it to take that over. When I was able to pass those tasks off to Lynette and see how much not only did I buy back my time, but I was able to realize how much of that time was actually very draining on me because I would actually dread doing these spreadsheets. It would often be something that I would procrastinate until the 11th hour, and I would spend 4 or 5 hours late at night doing all of the Excel and everything like that. So that way, of course, it was, handed in on time. The developers are always impressed, but I was drained out of it. And that time could have been better spent doing something that I was talented at. And I remember so distinctly, Lynette had said to me once, she's like, Francesca, why haven't you given me these tasks before? I'm like, well, I thought that I was actually, by me keeping the tasks from you, especially the ones that I didn't enjoy, I figured I was doing her a favor because I was giving her tasks that I thought that she would find enjoyable pleasure in. But it's because what we find pleasurable aspects of are very, very different polar opposites. So when I realized what her highest element was, being an earth, I was like, oh my gosh, I've been robbing Lynette of what she loves to do best. And so when we were able to get that beautiful relationship between the two of us, she did all those. I focused on selling and on the people. And our teamwork was like top notch. And it's funny, Stuart said in the chat here, he goes, Sarah, we'd either be the best of friends or absolutely worst enemies. Stuart, if for anyone that doesn't know, he's dominant high fire, high air, and very low earth and water. And he's right. I think that we always have a choice of how we want to conduct ourselves with different elements and different people. But when all push comes to shove, I think that it's so true that if we're able to pass off those tasks, the people that are incredibly talented and structured in it, then they fly, they're doing incredible, and we're able to focus on what our strengths are. And if I may, Judy, I noticed in the chat you mentioned when referencing earth, fire, etc., are you referencing the zodiac sign? So I just want to say, no, we're not. I know that there may be some correlation between the two, but this is strictly relating to behavioral science. So Jay and many other psychologists, doctors have actually curated the behavioral elements specifically based on neuroscience. And Jay, you're more than if you want to dive into that, but yeah, nothing to do with the zodiac sign. So
Yep.
just to
Nope.
answer that question.
No, great question. The elements we know from behavioral science that people remember imagery, iconography, etc., more effectively than they remember something like the drive to bond, the drive to defend, the drive to learn, and the drive to acquire. So the elements are just a representation of those four core biological drives, which is the science that was put forward by Dr. Paul Lawrence and Dr. Nitin Noria out of Harvard University to help us understand how we as human beings make our decisions each and every day. So while we did, and I will share this, and some people may not even know this, we actually did consult with some different people in terms of seeing if we could have alignment between the images and the drives. The actual science of this is all drives. But there are correlations, as Francesca said. Some people are like, oh, okay. But nope, I know nothing about. Apparently, I'm a water sign in a zodiac thing, which is exactly the opposite of what I am in behavioral elements. So it's not actually associated. But thank you for that question. One of the things that I did want to draw out from Stuart's comment, and I think this is an interesting nuance, right? Stuart is actually very aligned with my profile as well. I'm a high fire and a high air. And you, Francesca, are a fire and water. Now, I think that there could be some applications of how those interactions with Earth end up playing out because both Stuart and I are situated, our top two are on the unstructured side of the behavioral elements wheel. You have one on the unstructured with the fire, and then you have one on the more structured side with the water. And I think about the value that I see from Earth, and when I'm thinking about doing the Earth-based tasks, whether that's analysis, whether that's predicting, future outcomes, whether that's planning or process or systems or any of that, that's not what brings me joy. But I learned that Earth's really good at getting results when they do those things. So I look at the outcomes and I say, I want to win. And that's why I'm open to working with Sarah, because Sarah's going to make sure that the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and I can do this again and again and again and keep that chain of wins going. It sounds to me like when you were in the real estate world, that you stepped into some of those tasks to help the team and maybe a little bit of that water side of things, it brought you joy, as you said, because you were really contributing to the overall team win. And that balance between individual and collaborative and unstructured and structured, how does that play for you in terms of working with, let's call it either of the elements, whether it's earth or air, which are your secondary or fourth, or third or fourth?
I would say, Jay, it really depends. I think and I think that can change between if you're working on something on a project for, say, something like the Junior Chamber International, which some of you on this call are familiar with, or if it's work related or if it's more personal. I do find that those elements kind of show up in different ways. And I love the fact that, Jay, that you just touched on that because it really just depends on what it is that our external circumstances of where, we'll kind of pull from certain elements. I do find that my air ends up showing up quite high in some regards. I am a continual student. I work with different life and business coaches. I'm always on the search for understanding myself better, understanding the world better, understanding how I can show up as my best self better than who I was yesterday. So it's interesting how, just because we are, like Jay said, low in something doesn't mean that we're bad at it. It's just, it's going to come out in different ways. So I would say how my structured versus my unstructured side starts to show and develop. It'll really depend, but I would say specifically in the real estate world, I really had to be almost like that chameleon because there were certain people that I would work with that were very high earth, very high water, and maybe my unstructured side would be a little bit prickly to them. So I had to be very mindful to bring out those elements. And I love that Stuart mentioned, either we'll work together or we won't. And I think that's where a lot of us start, right? And it's so true. I think we get to the point where we go either it's going to work or it wasn't. It won't, but there's actually some beautiful little mesh between where we start to cross this threshold. And that's where the neuroplasticity comes in, where we start to change the aspect of that growth mindset instead of that fixed mindset of, well, actually, I can work with whoever I want to. It's all depending on my adaptability. I can choose if I want to work well with them or I can choose not to. Every single time that I came up against someone who was very, very high on the structured side of things. I kind of just molded a little bit to that. I was like, okay, they're going to value X, Y, and Z. How am I able to show that we have the same mission? We may go about it two different ways, but that doesn't mean we can't be succinct in our language. There's so many different little nuances that we can use in terms of our language when it comes to talking with someone that is high earth or high water, but specifically high earth. There's certain, you know, aspects even in my emails when I would send off my reports and I would say certain key words that would make my developers go, wow, Francesca is really valuing my process, the way that I've been doing this for the last 6 years, or whatever that may be. Even though my drive may not have shifted and my mission may not have shifted, we are now speaking the same language. And that person's able to look at me and go, Francesca understands me, she sees me, as opposed to just hitting our head up against the wall to say, you and I don't think the same, which isn't always the case, right? So, Jaya, I'm curious. Someone just DM'd me in on Facebook Messenger. They said, how does it earth and water? Because of course with air, sorry, earth and air, how do they relate to each other? I'm going to answer that question briefly, and then I'm going to pass the baton back to you just so I don't forget. But air is very much on that innovation aspect, the drive to learn, as we all know it as. So I would say with air being so very idea driven, they're conceptual, constantly exploring new possibilities. Earth is very practical, as we know, and systems oriented and focused on implementation reliability. But I would say Earth does appreciate the fact that air's creativity is really in the essence of innovation, and they can understand that air is going to keep the Earth from becoming stagnant and too overly conservative in that particular sense. But I'll be very frank that what will get on Earth's nerves when it comes to air, inconsistency. If you meet anyone with high air, Terry is actually high air, and he's incredible. You talk to him for 5 minutes, and you're just mind blown about his ideas. Jay and I can have conversations with him for hours just brainstorming. That man is his brain is exceptional. What someone like an Earth will see though is that it's inconsistency, it's scattered focus, and you perceive lack of follow through. That's not always the case for every air, but that may be the way that an Earth can see that. And I know that sometimes I will show up as that, having that Earth and sorry, that air and fire in me. So it's Earth may feel a little bit like air isn't exactly grounded in reality or logistics, and they're kind of in this pipe dream. But I think that's where the two of them can really work well together. So I hope that answers your question in the audience that Earth and air, I think, actually could be best of friends in that way. When you have someone that has exceptional ideas and can brainstorm for hours, Earth is the person that's going to literally and figuratively bring them back down to Earth to say, that is exceptional. Here's how you do it. Because air may not know how to do it, but Earth's going to have a plan. Jay, I'll pass the baton back to you.
Yeah, I'll comment on the air Earth dichotomy, and I'm glad that that got brought up because it's really interesting. If we were to take our 40,000 or so data sets, the combination of primary and secondary that is the lowest is air and Earth. So air being in the first, or Earth being in the first, and air or Earth being in the secondary for that. It's actually like less than 1% of all of the different assessments that have come in. Now, that is a little bit biased because Earth as a primary really only comes in at maybe 10%, 12% of all of the assessments that we've done up to this date. So there is a lower probability of Earth being somebody's primary, et cetera. Well, why does this matter? Because when we first saw it, and interestingly enough, one of the COEUS business partners is a primary air followed by a secondary Earth. And it was really fascinating for me because I saw the way that he would think. And I had conversations with him about, okay, well, what happens in your brain? He would come up with an idea and then he would spend the next hour and a half proving why it wasn't going to work. And then he'd follow up with a new idea that was going to solve all of those different problems and then spend the time going through it. Now, one of the things I asked was, how does that play for you? And he's like, it's exhausting. I can't have just hey, here's an idea, let's go do that. Because I'm going to find the 16 different things that I didn't think about or I need more research on or et cetera. And we work really well together because I'm just like, let's do it. We'll figure it out. And that's where my air comes into play of just no fear of failure. Let's give it a shot. If it doesn't work, we'll reset and we'll do it again. Um, but with that being said, between that air earth dichotomy, it was so fascinating to hear him and to get a better understanding. We actually did a study of about 20 different people that had that. And there is each of them, every single person, 100% reported a cognitive dissonance with themselves. They literally would argue themselves out of ideas. And in the worst case scenarios, that caused a lot of paralysis, unable to make a decision, not wanting to move forward, needing more information, wanting to spend more time brainstorming, etc. But when they did make a decision, it was usually the right decision because it had embedded so much inside of their brain. So if I take that research and study, it really does correlate to if I'm an earth and Francesca is an air, how that interaction can play out. In some places, it can really lead to the best possible solutions if there's a respect for each of those individual attributes that we're bringing to the table. If there's not a respect for those each individual attributes, the air might find that the earth is just structure for structure's sake and being a stick in the mud and, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. We're not going to have all the answers, but let's try. And earth is going to look at air and say, you haven't thought this through. You haven't considered X. You didn't look at this data. You're just running off and doing whatever you want. And it's not consistent. And there can be a lot of conflict or tension between there. So and I did see Sharon's question. I'm going to let you take a shot at it out of the gate here. Sharon's question is, what are the key words you would use in your emails? I love this question, but I'm going to let you swing away first, Francesca, and then I'll jump into that.
Sure, Jay, that sounds great. So Sharon, what I would say, it's going to be words like this, okay? So if you guys want to write this down, this is super helpful if you are interacting with someone as an Earth and you're sending them a report or an email or a check-in, whatever that may look like. It may be a one-on-one feedback meeting if you are a leader or a boss of someone who has high Earth. You want to use words like reliable, steady, secure, rooted. Grounded was another one that I wrote down, and consistent. Trust is huge for anyone on the structured side of things. For this goes for earth and water. So trustworthy. When it comes to support, that's huge. Solid, structural, practical, dependable, well prepared. It's a huge one. So sustainable, they want to make sure that anything that they are doing is sustainable. It's measured, it's thoughtful, resilient, protected, thorough, and this is a big one, built to last. So you want to remember that when it comes to the structured side of things, anyone who is going to be reading an email or hearing you speak to them or hearing you speak to another team member, they want to see that you are taking everything into consideration. You're not just there for the moment or in that moment right now that's fast and fleeting. They want to know, do you have our team's back for the long haul? And obviously, I'll caution you don't want to just use these words as a form of trying to do something that you have no intentionality to do. If you're going to use these words, make sure that your actions are following through on that, because if there's anything that anyone on that structured side of things, like an air, of earth or a water, are going to observe, is that your words are very cheap. They're going to notice that the high fire, high air, yeah, we say a lot, but what's our action look like beyond that? So if we're able to then match our words with that action and really show them, yes, we want this to be consistent. We want it to be built to last. We want it to be structured. We better be putting that action behind that. So if we're able to do both, they're going to be able to see not just in our words, but through how we're showing up for the team that we really do care. And that's where that trust is going to be built. One of the things I also mentioned, Taylor Clark, and thank you for that. She talked about a utility player. I love that. And that I think was more so on in terms when we were talking about neuroplasticity, is that we're able to have that utility, that we're able to, mold it and grow and evolve and not just be stuck in our way and be like, I'm a fire, that's who I am. No one gets along with me if they're not fire and air. That's just not a productive way to be, as we know. And Sharon, I'm glad that was helpful. You're welcome. Jay, how about yourself? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Sharon, I love this question because I have been coached by a number of Earths on how to communicate effectively with the earth. So, as Francesca said, the joke is I'd come in on Monday and be like, "Hey, we're going to China," and then by Wednesday, I'd already changed my mind and say we're going to wherever else. So, one of the earth that was in the company created what we call the thumbtack rule for me as a fire, which was, Jay, sounds like a great idea, this whole South America trip. Let's put a thumbtack in that. And if you're still excited about this at the end of this quarter or the next set of goals, we'll make it happen for you. Part of the reason is never tell a fire no, because I'll have already bought the South American tickets and we're going to be going there whether you like it or not. But that was the rule for me. And then I was coached on how do I approach an earth with one of my new ideas or with this new initiative. And this is the frame. I'll give it to you. Hey, Francesca, I'm thinking that we might want to switch strategies and take the direction of going to South America. Here's how I've considered all of the logistics for the company. This is how it fits the budget. This is how it fits the strategic plan. This is where I think the team will really thrive from this. This is where I think we're going to struggle, but I believe that this is overcomable because of X. Now, Francesca, as an Earth, I know that you probably need a little time to think about this and to consider it and get back to me. Would you be able to give me feedback on this by Friday and point out the errors that I'm definitely making in judgment and or things I haven't considered? So that's the narrative of it. But what did I do there? Essentially, here is the thought. Here's the research, the data, the information. Here's how it's consistent. Exactly what Francesca said. It's consistent with their budget. It's consistent with their strategic plan. Here's what I have thought about. And I'm sure there's things that I haven't thought about. Take a little time to do your analysis of this, and then let's have a feedback conversation at a certain point in time. Don't just say when you get a chance. On Friday at noon, could we have a feedback conversation and you can help me see what gaps I might be missing? Now, that requires two things, is thinking through all of the words that Francesca said, which were perfect: structure, system, reliability, quality, etc., consistency. But it is also creating some space for them to do their analysis, because they're going to do it whether you like it or not. So when you say, I need an answer by 9 a.m. tomorrow, what that's going to do is cause that cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine to flood the system. And the answer is probably going to be no. Why? Because our default answer is no or nothing new when we are in a heightened state of stress. This has been demonstrated in a number of different studies. So if we're looking to have influence with an Earth, one of the things that we really need to be cognizant of, they were going to want to take some time. Now, to Sarah's point earlier on in the conversation, they probably want more time than you're able to give. But if you're able to say, we really need to make a decision by Friday, I know that's a short amount of time. Would you be able to get enough of an analysis done on Friday that we can make a decision to at least move forward with X, Y, and Z? Now they're going to be reasonable, because Earth is actually one of the core values underlying Earth is actually fairness and reasonability. Okay. And that's something that's often missed. They want fair, but they also look at it and say, okay, fair can be 50-50. You get half of what you want, I get half of what I want. I'd like 2 weeks to think about this, but the halfway point is really 50-50. That's fair. Let's do it. Any thoughts on that, Francesca?
Yeah, one of the things that when you said that, Jay, and I just want to thank you for communicating that to everyone in the audience, because one of the things that it sparked for me was when I was dealing with certain individuals as a fire and them being high earth. I thought about some of the things that worked for me and that I had to kind of tweak as a fire to make sure that they felt seen and heard, because I think what ends up happening, like Jay said, is that there is this gap that they end up feeling like Jay just doesn't hear what I'm saying, that he's not understanding why I'm making these decisions. To an Earth, they're not doing this to be a Debbie Downer or to say, no to everything. They are doing it because they care so much about the long-term sustainability of the team, whether it be financially or just energetically. So that way we're not being burnt out on the second day. So one of the things I thought about was, and one of the things I appreciated that Jay said was slowing down our deliveries. Fire, we tend to react a little bit quickly. Earth needs processing time. So us saying something to them, just like Jay said, let's take a moment to walk through this together. I know this isn't what we expected, and I really value your steadiness in moments like this. That's going to be really important. It gives us a moment to breathe. There's power in the pause, as we say. It's going to give us a moment to breathe and not just react, but it's also going to give it a moment for the earth to be like, okay, Jay and Francesca are listening to the needs of the team and they're not just reacting quickly. One of the things that I also did in terms of my development was acknowledging their effort. So saying something, just being mindful that Earth puts a lot, often puts in quiet, consistent behind the scenes work that we're maybe not necessarily privy to. People may see what we're doing as fires or high air. We're selling, we're delivering, we're bringing in the money, but we're not necessarily always acknowledging, and maybe because we don't have that high Earth, we're not really understanding how much an Earth does. Even as my executive assistant, Lynette, sometimes I forget. It's easy to forget how much behind the scenes work that they do. They may feel invisible. They may feel a little bit unappreciated if things go sideways. So if there is an unexpected circumstance that maybe doesn't go to plan, saying something like, I see how much you care in the preparation you put into this. This hasn't gone unnoticed, and it really, really mattered. Even though we're shifting gears, we're not going to China anymore, we're going to South America. I still really value all the work you put into this, and we're actually going to be able to bridge that to what we're doing now. All that's not going to waste. And then the other thing too that I thought about as well that I just made a note of while Jay was talking was validating their discomfort without fixing it too fast. I think it's really easy for us to just have a quick band-aid of like, sorry you feel that way, and off we go. But just Earths may feel a little bit disoriented and anxious when we break plans or we change our route, which we do as fires all the time. So I think like just resisting the urge to leap to solutions before they feel heard. So if we can say something along the lines of, I know how hard it is when things veer off plan, especially after building such a solid foundation. I want to make space for how you feel before we proceed ahead. Then all of a sudden that Earth's going to be like, wow, thank you. And then, of course, as we all know, if we can invite collaboration to kind of reground, I think that's going to be really, really important for anyone on that structured side. And this goes for earth and water. So saying something like, what would help us reroute right now? Your sense of structure is something I really trust. Help me to understand that before we go in our new direction. And that's really going to make that earth person, that earth behavioral element go, wow, Jay values me, Francesca values me, or whatever. And then just really reinforcing their value beyond the outcome, even if we do not win, even if this may not be something that with an outcome that you're looking for, we really, really value you. So you're the rock in our process. Jay, what are your thoughts on that? Because that's
Yeah.
something that definitely has related to me over the years.
So I'm loving what you're saying on this, and I'm going to flip the script here a second, okay? Because sometimes it's not even just how we communicate to an Earth, it's also how Earth ends up communicating to us that can create some tension. And it's not intentional, but it can create that tension. And there's two different ways that I think that I've seen, and in some of our different research and analysis, it seems pretty consistent. So for any of you Earths that are out there, you can confirm nor deny this. You get two different types of messages often. We'll say it in a context of email. Here's the two different types. One is yes or no. So you might put in, hey, I'm asking for this, and this is what I want to use it for, and this is how I'm going to do this. And you get a one-word email back that says no or yes. Okay. And they've made that evaluation. They've said, okay, yes, it's within budget, or no, it's not. Yes, it's within the scope of work, or no, it's not. And it is a simple yes or no answer. The other form of communication that you may receive from an Earth is no. Subpoint A of the bylaws express this, and subpoint B expresses this, and here's where it doesn't fit with this. And it'll have literally subpoints all the way through with a ton of analysis, a ton of explanation. And generally, what we see and what exhibits those two different types of responses, if the system has been in place for a long time and that system has proved to be reliable and functional, you will maybe just get a 1 to 2 word answer. If you are in a situation where there has to be an analysis or whatever that sort of background information that would be required because of this decision, that's where a lot of that detail orientation is really, and it's going to be structured. It's going to be well thought out, structured. They may have spent 8 hours on putting all of the details into that email. So that way, no one can actually question whether that decision was the yes decision or the no decision for a purpose. Sometimes, if you're not in that headspace, that can actually be a little jilting. Because you may not get a, hey, Francesca, how are you today? What's going on in your world? No, there's not an opportunity right now to spend that money, although it seems like such a lovely idea. You're probably not going to get that email naturally. Now, I have seen Earths really build, and oftentimes what they do is they put their answer, and I do this too as a fire, to be honest. They put the answer down and then they think to themselves, let me go back and add something nice into here. Have a great day after I've just destroyed your dreams and said no, right? But the whole aspect of that is when we are in a place where we're receiving a communication from Earth or an Earth to an Earth communication, those are some of the typical things. Francesca, have you experienced that before when communicating with an Earth? How has that landed for you? Because you've got a much higher level of water. My fire takes over and I'm just like direct, give me a yes or no. Perfect. I'm moving on or I'm figuring out a way around it if I get that no. And yeah, I saw you, Sarah.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jay. I would say in my experience in the business world, it would be like overcautious language from an Earth standpoint. So they would say something like, I'm not sure we're ready. Let's pause and review every step again. That feels risky right now, especially in the development space when they're dealing with, high stakes. How it lands for me as a fire. It's like brakes are being absolutely slammed on momentum. I'm like, oh my gosh, well, we have momentum. We can do this. Or like they just don't trust your instincts. It's frustratingly slow. And it's more so fear-based, which is not obviously how we operate as high fires. Obviously, the water in me has the compassion and empathy to understand why they're feeling that way, but it still can feel like they're pumping the brakes on our momentum. I do find that the hyper focus on detail and logistics can sometimes be a factor. So Earths might fixate on the process, the timeline, the tasks, and especially risk management is huge. How it will land for someone on that unstructured side, and this goes for fire and air, but this is for me personally. It's kind of like they're missing the forest for the trees, or like your big vision is being buried into with red tape, or just suffocating and overly rigid, and it's not their intention at all. And obviously, I can recognize that, but in that moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, if we could just do this right now, you could see the value in it. But that's just not how that resonates. And then I think too, it's one of those things where I have found, especially and when I was doing the large scale developments, it's like reluctancy to pivot quickly. Things are changing on the dime in real estate. Every single moment is different and it shifts and changes.
True
So
everywhere
someone
nowadays, too.
yeah, exactly. Right. Earths might kind of resist. So it's like spontaneous shifts and fast decision makings, anything like that. They're not going to say, just go for it. That's just not the way that they think. Right. So how it ends up landing for a fire, it's kind of just like they're holding back growth, or it's like a lack of faith in that boldness, so to speak. And it's someone that actually I had a conversation with my developer time and time again of, is there a reason why you're not trusting me in this? And his answer was always brilliant. It's not that I'm not trusting you. It's just that I think a little bit differently than you do. I think that's the neat part. Once you're able to identify, it's not that they have a lack of trust in what you're doing. They know your vision is incredible. But it's just going to be more a matter of really getting down to, are we looking at all the facts? Are we looking at all of the processes first? And if we can just take a step back, have that pause, and give that to them, that's when they're able to say, Francesca, go for it. And as the years went on, myself and that particular developer, we had an incredible working relationship because of one solid thing. It started becoming less about how you said every word, how you did every single little thing. It was less on the controlling aspect. Once that trust was built, it was like, Francesca, go for it. We know you've got this. And that's how things kind of shifted. But I still respected that their part in it was going to be every once in a while to have those check-ins. And how I was able to personally mitigate that was I had a weekly Zoom call. They wanted it to be quick, so it was no longer than 10 minutes. I had an agenda. Everything was very meticulous in that particular regard, but I made sure that they knew what I was up to and what the next week looked like, what the budget was, how we were going to execute, where some of the decisions I was curtailing because it wasn't to our main vision. because I did that every single week, there was less micromanaging to the point where they just let me do whatever I wanted. They saw the value, but because I valued their that rigidity or that structure, the week check-ins, that weekly sync as I called it, that was all that they needed. And so I think sometimes if we're able to recognize how they are looking to show up in that space, if we can value those needs, you'd be surprised at how much they're able to let you run with those ideas and not be so structured and mitigating that flow. Does that land for you, Jay?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and again, it does go back down to, am I valuing the contributions that somebody else is bringing to the table? I want to comment on Taylor's comment in the chat. She said, I try to give high earth structure back, give them the boundaries or bare minimum if needing something quickly. And that's that respect of saying, hey, look, if I have, when I'm working with my earth air partner, there are times that I've had to have quick decisions. I say, hey, listen, I know this is uncomfortable, but here's what we need, here's our parameters, and I'm asking you to get this done in this short amount of time. But if I go to that well too many times, they're going to feel disrespected, like I'm not actually caring. So, yes, you spot on. I do want to take a moment because we're nearly at the end of our time here. I do want to take a moment because I think this is a great question to walk out on. So I'm going to answer this question shortly. I'll kick it over to Francesca if she's got a short answer for it too. Sharon brought up in the chat, what is something that will help us reroute? And I think that's a cool question because how do we develop our earth, or how do we build into our earth? How do we leverage the power of our earth? I'm going to say a couple of quick things for me that really worked is number one, I know that what frustrates an earth for me is my impulsiveness. So that was something that I had to learn to manage. So for me to be more earth was to be more systematic. And I put a number of different practices into play, like prolonged gratification. So if there was something that I wanted a new computer. My fire and air would have been like, go to Amazon, buy the computer. In this case, I would go to Amazon, put three different computers into my cart, and then I would evaluate that for 24 hours before I made my decision. Now, usually it was the same decision that I would have had in the beginning, but what am I actually doing? I'm practicing prolonged gratification, reducing my impulsiveness, and I'm also practicing, okay, I'm going to evaluate different things and make sure I'm not just going with the one that gut instinct told me to go with, but I'm actually going to evaluate these three things side by side. If an earth came and said, what made you choose that? I could say, well, I looked at these, and this is the one that I wanted. So that's a practice that we can get into. Practicing using something like a to-do list or some kind of project management software. Practicing doing something where it's like, hey, I'm okay with just going on a vacation and not having any plans, not even having a schedule for a hotel or whatever else. Really sitting down and saying, how could I plan and optimize my best vacation? So really leaning into some of those things to practice them will help us develop and grow our earth element. Francesca, do you have anything to add in our last minutes here?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sharon, I know that she had mentioned that landed for her, and I'm glad. And just echoing what Jay said, one of the things that I used to do, these are some of like some bullet points, I guess you could say, but if you want to jot down, like acknowledging what was solid. So like you laid such a strong foundation, that still matters as you're changing the direction. Create a clear next step. So even a small action plan can re-anchor those earths into feeling that productivity, right? So even if you're just saying, hey, I really valued what you did here. Here's the next three steps and actionable items that you can take that will really help us here. Giving them space to process. So they still need that emotional space to kind of catch up with what you've just disrupted for them in their hard work. And asking what still feels dependable. So asking them to locate their internal and external anchors of saying, hey, what would be valuable and how I can bring value to you now that I've completely changed the course of direction, say from China to South America. And then reinforcing their contributions. So reminding them that we're not denying the fact that their work was valuable. We're just simply we're pivoting a touch. And then inviting them to help restructure. So when they know that they're valued, say, hey, look, I know that we've changed the direction, but your help in restructuring our process is going to be invaluable into what we're doing next. And then just normalizing the disruption, I think, is really important. So just even saying something as simple to them as even strong ground shakes sometimes, and that's okay. Just reminding them that, like, yes, I know that as a fire, we will change course, but you're valued and we've got this. And then just really offer that trust and reassurance, and making sure that they know that you really value their judgment and that you're here to listen if there's anything that they feel concerns about. So that way they feel seen and heard. I hope that lands.
Absolutely. So I want to say thank you for joining us on this month's Lunch and Learn, all focused on the earth element, our drive to defend, and how we can really leverage the value and the power that comes from systems, processes, reliability. This is a lot of love that I want to send out to all of you Earths out there, whether it's in your primary or secondary. You really do make the world go round on time. So thank you for engaging in this conversation. I want to say thank you to Francesca for stepping in 2 months in a row, this time for Terry, and for bringing your insight and your valuable contributions to this webinar and Lunch and Learn. So thank you so much for being here, Francesca.
Thank you so much, Jay, for having me. And thank you to everyone in the audience for your comments, your questions, and just the energy that you brought today. So thank you all. And thank you, Jay.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone for being here. If you have questions, further questions, and you want to reach out, connect with Francesca or myself, let's continue this conversation. Next month, we're going to be looking at what should we be doing from the elements perspective for an amazing summer vacation. So we're going to bring that to you next month, and we'll see how this will shape out in terms of, I think we may have 3 panelists for next month. So be ready for that. Maybe a new announcement coming at some point in time. We will look forward to seeing you 30 or 32 days from now, whatever it is. You Earths will figure out the exact math. But thank you so much for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.